inclusive leadership. Just a reminder, inclusive leadership is a class designed with 3 goals in mind. Number 1, develop students' individual approach to change making and leadership. Number 2, develop empathy. And number 3, develop problem solving skills. Weekly, we will examine the oppressive pitfalls of systems and structures operating in the world today with doses of historical context of the system and its impacts on the world/nation at large. Additionally, we will dig into the practical elements of what it takes to lead yourself and lead a team. The aim of inclusive leadership is to develop well-rounded young leaders that can apply their skills to any system, career ambition, or life circumstance with clear and guiding vision that includes the marginalized. Whew, okay. So, the topic that we are looking at today is the topic of transition and what it looks like to lead yourself and others in it and through it. And you are probably experiencing all kinds of transitions today as a student who is living in the midst of a pandemic. And we all have had to transition in the face of that. And there's a lot that comes along with transition. There are a lot of emotions, and there are a lot of structural changes, and we have to adjust to all of them. Because one thing that is absolutely certain is that you will experience transition in every phase of your life, whether you're leading a team or you're under the leadership of somebody else. And so, as we look at transition today, we're going to define it. We're going to talk a little bit about what it means to go through transition and why it's important that we look at it and why we examine it. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what transition has looked like in your life and how you've processed it and handled it. Because there are some times when innately we know what to do. And so, yeah, let's jump right in. So first of all, why is it important to take a look at transition as it relates to leadership? So I want you to pause this for the next 5 minutes. I want you to go navigate over to this podcast from the Center for Creative Leadership, and it's going to you can either read or listen to the podcast about leading in times of transition, and then we're going to discuss kind of some of the main points from that. So go ahead and take a second to do that. Okay, and now that you have done that, welcome back. We noticed there are 4 main takeaways that I had after listening to that podcast, reading the article. Number 1, we will always experience change. That is something that is going to be a constant in our lives. And number 2, especially in an organization, transition can trigger a multitude of reactions, behaviors in both leaders and those they lead, so those followers. Number 3, transition requires leaders to take into account both the structural implications, so how this particular change is going to affect how a system functions, and they also have to take into consideration the human dynamic and how we're all human beings. It's not just systems, but systems are made of humans, and those humans have emotions and behaviors, and those in turn will impact that system. So it's vital that we take into account the human dynamic, because when leaders ignore, I love this quote, when leaders ignore or minimize the people side of managing change, perfectly good strategies and change initiatives stall or fail. So change can be good, and you can have all the strategy in the world, but if you fail to take into account humanity, the humanity of the people that are operating your system, then your change or your initiative will fail, even if it's a good change. And so let me give a not business related example to this. So if you're in a family unit and the parents of that family get divorced, and in the divorce, it's a really, a simple divorce. Both sides, let's take out of the consideration, it hasn't been really messy, but the structure of the family has to change. And it might even be a good change in this instance. Maybe it was not a healthy marriage. And so that divorce takes place. There's a change in the structure. There's a change in this family system, in this family unit. And now the children in that family might have to have a room at mom's house and a room at dad's house. That's a really big change for a young person. It's a big change for the adults in the situation too. But if we're looking at the young people in this situation, that's a big change for them. And if we don't take into account their humanity, we miss out on all the emotions that they have, even if it made complete sense to make the decision for these two parents to get divorced. There are still emotions that are happening in the hearts and in the minds of the people involved that if we don't take into account, then the behaviors that are attached to those emotions that were triggered through this transition don't make any sense to us. So when Bobby, his parents get divorced and he starts acting out at school, we assume right then and there, yeah, it might be related to this transition that he's going through, but we miss all the emotions that are underneath and that are part of the triggering that's happening. And so this doesn't just apply to leading other people, but this also applies to leading yourself through transition. So when you experience transition, allowing yourself to break down that the behavior that you're experiencing, maybe every day, after your parents got divorced, you woke up and you were just consumed by sadness. And that made you not want to get out of bed in the morning. Well, sadness was the emotion, and the emotion was attached to the behavior of not wanting to get out of your bed. And that was all triggered by this transition. And if we don't take time to examine what transition does to us within ourselves, then we cannot possibly lead others through transition. All right. Sorry, my slides are taking a second. There we go. Okay, so how do we define transition? And where might we experience it? Well, let's define transition using the words a shift or change in the normal way of doing or being, or the process or period of changing from one state or condition to another. Essentially, transition is just change when something that was one way becomes another way. And this can happen in relationships. Friends can move and your routines can change. You're experiencing a routine change right now by not going to school every day. Ambitions, maybe you always dreamt of being, a skydiver or I don't know, cliff jumper. And then all of a sudden you realize that you have a fear of heights. That's a pretty big transition if that's what you wanted to be your whole life. A change in family structure, which we talked about. There can also be transitions in the workplace. During this time of COVID-19, my office at YFC actually experienced a pretty big transition when one of our executives had to be laid off. And he was a really good friend of mine. And so through that transition, I have experienced both a big shift and we're adjusting to picking up the work from his role, and where all of our jobs have changed, our job descriptions have changed as a result of him being let go. And in addition to that, we lost a really important part of our team and a really beloved friend. And so that emotionally has had an effect on me. And so we experience transition in all areas of our lives. And it's not just when we are the people leading. I've experienced multiple transitions where I've been the follower in that instance. And it's made all the difference when someone who is leading me has had taken the emotional inventory within themselves to say, oh, wow, if this transition is affecting me, I can't imagine what it's doing to the people around me. And they've paused and given space for us to experience all of the emotions that come along with transition. And speaking of those emotions, what might come up when you're experiencing transition? I want you to think about that for yourself. But for me, grief has come up. And I've really been saddened and had to let go and experience loss when transition comes up. And not just, with a coworker, but also I've experienced transition in my own life and feeling the loss of friendship. When a friend didn't want to be in a relationship anymore, or experiencing loss as a result of changing my career and deciding that I wanted to work locally instead of traveling. Those are all transitions, and as small as they might be, they still have an effect on us. And there have been seasons where I've experienced frustration and anger. Transition can cause an abundance of fear. And if they do some restructuring at your job, or a teacher is let go, all of a sudden you're kind of afraid, like, what will happen next? You don't have an understanding of or a vision of what might happen next. And so fear might be a part of that. You might experience disappointment because you always imagined that you were going to get to, walk at graduation. Like if there's a senior that's not experiencing disappointment for all of the loss that they're experiencing in this transition, I would be shocked. And the last emotion that I added on here was excitement. There have been a lot of seasons where I was excited for change. When I graduated from high school, I was really excited for the transition to college. I couldn't wait to get out on my own. And so sometimes change involves excitement, and that is absolutely a valid emotion that can come up. So what I want you to do next is I want you to take a look at the Old Shore, New Shore handout. It's under Files, Class Materials, and Transition. And I want you to respond to the following questions in your personal journal. Because as we look at change, what's the most important and the best thing that you can do as a leader is learn how you experience transition. And you can learn how you are triggered by transition and what emotions that triggers within you. And if you can acknowledge those things in yourself, as you're walking alongside someone else as a leader, you can point those out for them and you can help them to process in a human way the emotions that come up. So the first question I want you to answer is, as you look at this Old Shore, New Shore picture, I know it's not the best quality, but you have an idea. There's an island on one side and an island on the other, and a transition zone is the ocean in between. And what do you notice? And what can you see as you look at that picture? And with that, what do you notice about the Old Shore? What do you notice about the New Shore? And what do you notice about the transition zone? Question number 2 is, based on what you've observed, where would you place yourself in this scene? Where do you fit in whatever transition you're experiencing in your life? Where do you fit in this scene? And what emotions come up for you as you consider where you're at? What emotions might you be feeling in that particular place? And then the last question I want you to answer is, if you could add an image or a word somewhere on the Old Shore, New Shore handout, maybe it's in the transition zone in the water, maybe it's deep out, maybe it's in the sky. If you could add something, what would it be and where would you put it? Okay? So that's the activity I want you to do in your personal journal today. And then let's see if I can get to my last slide, or maybe that is my last slide. Nope. Okay, one more slide. And on our posts page, that should be the first page that comes up on Microsoft Teams, I want us to learn a little bit from each other's lived experiences. So could you just answer these 3 questions, and they're posted up there. Number 1, what emotions have you had during times of transition? Specifically, I would love for you to talk about the time of transition you're in right now, of walking through COVID-19 and the coronavirus and what that has meant for you and your family, and what emotions have come up for you. And I want you to talk about, how have you navigated those emotions? How did you respond? What did you do? Did you wake up feeling really excited about, not having to wake up for school so you got to sleep in? And how did you navigate that emotion? Or vice versa, maybe you woke up and you felt upset and angry, and maybe you went for a walk. So talk about how you've navigated those emotions. And then the last thing I want you to do is answer, how could you help those you're leading navigate the emotions that arise from change? So I want you to picture yourself in a leadership role. It can be a leadership role you're currently in, maybe in your family or in your school. But it could also, I want you to imagine maybe what you would be like as a leader as you get older. So let's say you're the CEO of a company. And include this in your response, where you picture yourself at and who you're leading. And I want you to just say, maybe you would share your own story and give people space to share theirs. Or maybe you would give people the week off, But I want you to answer this question really honestly. How could you help those that you're leading navigate the emotions that arise from change based on your own experience and what's worked for you? Okay? And that is all I have for you today on transition. If you have more ideas or thoughts, or you find resources and you want to plug them, feel free to shoot me an email and I'll put them on the Microsoft Teams page so that we can all enjoy those resources together. Thank you all so much, and I hope that you are finding ways to stay happy and stay sane in this real weird world that we're living in right now. And I look forward to seeing you when we get back to SAMI.